I've come here today to carry out a survey of the plants in a 1 kilometre square not far from my home. These records will go onto a database on my laptop and will also appear in a new book on the flora of Cornwall. I have with me a list of the plants recorded since the year 2000. These are in black and I don't have to re-record these. The ones in red are drawn from a list of the commonest 250 species of plants in Cornwall, and it will save me time just being able to tick these off. Anything that's not on the list I'll have to write down separately. So I've got to turn back at this junction and go right along the road I came down in the first place. I'm walking along a fairly busy road now, having to be careful of the traffic, watching out for the plants, and there is some hemp agrimony, which I seem to remember is on the list for something I need. These days, most cornfields are sprayed in order to kill the weeds, but sometimes along the edges and in the field corner, here right by a gate, you find a few weeds still growing, and here we have a few plants of sun spurge. I'd noticed that the soft shield fern was one of the common species needed, and here it is. It's actually my favourite fern. This is hard fern. If you find this, you know that the soil here locally is very acidic. I'll just tick it off the list. There we are. Here's the final list. I managed to expand the total from 131 species to 179. A reasonable morning's work. We're now going to spool forward just a few months to show you the superb book that Colin French produced in super quick time. The distribution maps are based on records from numerous different recorders, all of them unpaid. I myself contributed just over 175,000 of these records. These were made over a period of around 20 years from more than 1,001 kilometre squares, entailing a lot of walking. Here's the map for the sun spurge. This is the one we saw growing on the field border. Now let's go back in time to early August. This painted lady butterfly could be a recent immigrant, or it could have bred locally from an earlier immigration back in springtime. Note the long, slender black proboscis busily probing the flower head for nectar. The wall butterfly, also known as the wall brown, usually has two broods in Britain. The first of these occurs in May and June. The progeny from this brood then start to emerge as adults towards the end of July and in early August. This is what we're seeing here on Watermint. By contrast, the meadow brown has a long season with a continuous sequence of broods. You can see them more or less throughout the summer, from about May onwards. Because of this overlap in generations, you can always see fresh, newly hatched specimens beside battered old geriatrics. But they can still fly okay. The peacocks are now nearing the end of their rather brief appearance, before they go into a typically early hibernation. Perhaps more than most butterflies, speckled woods seem to spend less of their time on flowers and more of their time perched. This one made a fatal mistake when it chose this particular perch. It didn't notice the white crab spider lurking amongst the grass seed heads. It really wasn't this butterfly's lucky day, because this particular crab spider normally waits in ambush on flowers. The spider's only just over half grown, so it's amazing how it was able to capture and subdue such large and vigorous prey. It's impressive how this miniature killer can hang on against the buffeting of the strong wind. The Brimstone Butterfly is one of the welcome signs of spring, being one of the first butterflies to put in an appearance. There's then a long gap before the new generation starts to emerge fairly late on in the summer. When at rest, this beautiful male will bear a close resemblance to a yellowing dead leaf. This is a burdock plant, and I've come here to film some rather entertaining little flies that lay their eggs in the flower heads. As the common name suggests, the flower heads of burdock are covered in a dense array of hooked burrs. They're very popular with a variety of insects, especially bumblebees. This very large leaf-cutting bee was a regular visitor. See how she's storing masses of pale burdock pollen on the dense brush of hairs beneath her abdomen. Hoverflies are less enthusiastic about the flowers, but they come occasionally, as do various butterflies, such as this large white. All these busy visitors seem adept at avoiding being trapped on the vicious hooked burrs. The damage to this leaf indicates where this green tortoise beetle has been feeding. It's not very happy about the common flower bug running over its back. So that's the introduction to the plant. Now let's have a look at the fly I've come here to film. It's tiny, it's always engaged in absolutely frenetic activity, and it really fascinates me. It rejoices in the scientific name of Torellia tussilaginis. I'm going to call it the Burdock Gall Fly. As we've just been seeing, the males spend most of their time chasing each other around and fighting. They're trying to establish their own private space on the plant, where they can have unfettered access to any females that show up. This is not easily accomplished. The density of males is usually really high, so they just engage in a frantic free-for-all. They spend their time scurrying around and using their pictured wings in a threat display at one another. If intimidation by wing waving doesn't do the job, then they resort to chasing and actual physical combat. This is what it's all about, a female. Just look at the long ovipositor sheath projecting from the tip of her body. The males lack this and so are much shorter. You can get a good impression of her size by comparison with this visiting worker bumblebee. The larvae of this tiny fly feed on the seeds deep within the flower heads. The female therefore needs to get her eggs into position within the plant. She does this by carefully positioning her body between the burrs and forcing her long ovipositor downwards into the plant tissues. It's not always possible. After making several probing tests, she still can't find quite the right place. The telescopic ovipositor of this female is still extruded, showing that she's just finished laying eggs. She's noticed a male approaching, so she quickly makes herself scarce. This male, at bottom, has managed to sneak up on a female who is too busy to notice him. If he's going to claim her, he needs to launch himself onto her back and stay in place for at least 10 seconds. But now she's finally spotted him, and she's ready. And she's too quick for him. It's a lot easier if a male can claim a female while she's laying her eggs. With seductive flicks of his body, he entices her to give in. She controls the process. The male can only connect and mate if she extrudes her ovipositor. During the actual act of copulation, he gently rocks his body from side to side. Then he breaks the connection by rotating through 180 degrees. Unfortunately for the male's chances of achieving sexual conquest, they suffer from a perpetual shortage of females. This can lead to male rivalry actually on the female. Here she's busily trying to lay her eggs while 3 males are scuffling on her back. But just wait a second. 3 is not even the maximum number. The situation can get seriously overcrowded. One by one, each new male joins the chaotic scrum, jostling for position on the female's back. And just look, through all this, the female doggedly goes on with her egg laying. So why are all these males engaging in such apparently futile manoeuvring? Well, once the female finally stops laying her eggs, she'll accept and mate with the first male in the correct position on her back. So this stimulates a furious amount of competition to be in the right place at the right time. Whichever male wins that competition will then fertilise the next set of eggs that the female starts to lay. By the way, this is a challenging subject for the macro photographer. These flies are so tiny that the slightest movement to and fro brings them in and out of focus. In the moments when they are in focus, just look at the beautiful iridescent green eyes that are typical of this species. If you were this late arriving male, what would you do? Join the throng, or go and look for a different female who's free? He ends up opting for the latter choice. So why is this parasitic wasp also prowling among the burdock flowers? Well, it's not just our fly larvae that are feeding on the seeds. There are several kinds of moth larvae that do likewise. This female parasitic wasp knows that they're there, and she's out to get them. Hinging her long, black, needle-like ovipositor downwards from its sheath, she forces it deep into the flower heads, seeking the moth caterpillars concealed within. She'll then lay an egg within each caterpillar's helpless body. The larva of the parasitic wasp will then complete its development, feeding inside the living body of the caterpillar. You may be asking yourself, how on earth does an egg manage to pass through the incredibly narrow channel within the ovipositor? Well, each egg is very soft and flexible. As it passes through the ovipositor, it's compressed into a rather longer worm-like shape, but resumes its normal form when it pops out the other end. The male gall fly who pops up on the left is clearly hoping that he's chanced upon a free female. Clearly he's in for a disappointment. Note how she constantly strokes the flower head with her antennae. These bear a dense array of highly tuned sensors, capable of detecting the faintest of scents given off by the concealed caterpillars. As I've mentioned before, I just can't stay away from the coast for long. I'm making this trip to film one of my favourite insects, the Pentalin Bee. Just look at that big mass of long, shaggy hairs adorning the hind legs. This is called the scoper. It's used for ferrying cargoes of pollen back to the nest. This particular nest has been built in sand, right beside the coast path, busy with people. See how her back legs are now bare of pollen, ready for the next load. The pollen favoured by the Pentalin bee is normally derived from yellow-flowered members of the daisy family. In this case, extensive stands of common fleabane are being visited by numerous females. The local brown-banded carder bees seem to prefer the pink-flowered sawwort. By mid-August, most Cornish roadsides are ablaze with a colourful mass of wildflowers. Of these, one of the most spectacular, to my mind at least, is betony. It's not only popular with me, but also with hordes of bumblebees. The flowers are accompanied by the constant hum of these busy pollinators. In most counties, marsh woundwort, as its name suggests, is found in rather wet places. But in Cornwall it's pretty common on really dry roadsides. One plant that is restricted to damp places is the wavy St John's wort. It's rather local in Britain, mainly being found in southwest England and southwest Wales. Over the last 20 years, it's been found in 322 1 km squares within Cornwall. I myself have found it in thousands in previously unknown localities. One of its characteristics is the red underside to the petals. This is shared with the slender St John's wort, but that's a plant of very dry banks, and its flowers are much smaller than these. In its marshy habitat, the wavy St John's wort is often accompanied by the very common and widespread square-stalked St John's wort. Its flowers are much smaller, paler yellow, and lack the red underside to the petals. Back in early July, I showed you the fascinating mating habits of the grass funnel weaver spider. Now, by the middle of August, each female has constructed a strange, labyrinthine silken nest. It's within the privacy of its confines that she will lay and guard her eggs. She usually works strictly in darkness, but this female seems to be adding some finishing touches during daylight. But now, a little drama occurs that I just couldn't believe. A male turns up. What's he doing here? He should be dead. The mating season took place several weeks ago, after which the males usually die off. This female seemed to be rather confused about the invasion of her property. Eventually, she tried to expel the intruder by pushing him away. No matter how hard she shoved, he just wouldn't give way. So much for male spiders being afraid of the females. Eventually, though, she gives up and retreats back inside her nest, only to be quickly followed by the really insistent male. He just won't take no for an answer. He presses on straight into the nest's interior. He's now face to face with the female. She just kept on trying to drive him away. So did he get to mate in the end? I don't know. I just gave up, it was all taking so long. And I couldn't really see what was happening inside the nest anyway. Quick note, if the female had already laid her eggs, then the male was wasting his time. And so, we leave the spiders on their gorse bush on Bombing Beacon and retreat back to my garden nearby. Because I allow certain patches of grass to grow longer than normal, my garden provides perfect habitat for the common field grasshopper. I filmed this courtship activity from the comfort of a chair on my small patio. The larger one on the left, kicking its legs, is the female. When I started filming them, they'd already been busy courting for some time. The female was obviously getting hungry, so she broke off for a snack on a dandelion leaf. After finishing feeding, she moves off slightly up top left. But by now, the male has lost interest in her. He's vibrating his back legs to produce gentle courtship chirps to a new female coming in from the right. But despite his best efforts, she too was proving frustratingly hard to get. And now, like the other female, she turned out to be more interested in food than sex. His initial strategy to win her round is to generate more song with his back legs. When that didn't seem to produce results, he started to climb up round the back. Right, I thought, I'm going to film him sneaking around and jumping straight on her. But no. Seeing what the female was busy doing, he decided that he too was hungry. So he tucked into an adjacent grass stem, but close enough to keep an eye on the female. Note the conspicuous gender differences between them. As well as being much smaller, the male is also more intensely coloured, usually in tones of red. After being played along for more than half an hour without any result, the male eventually gives up and walks away. It seems that he spotted yet another female close by. But she proved to be busy laying eggs, so she's simply not interested. In a desperate final throw of the dice, he turns his attention to a nearby juvenile. But that really is destined to be an exercise in futility. It's about now that the oak leaf perches favoured by the speckled wood butterflies begin to become suffused with white. The culprit is the oak mildew fungus. The white mycelium covers and penetrates the leaves, which provide the fungus with food. I started filming these two speckled wood butterflies in the hope that they might prove to be male and female. If so, maybe I will be able to film some courtship activity. And that's exactly what happened. They flew off and landed nearby. The male enfolds the female's antennae in his wings. Then with repeated tapping, he showers them with sexual pheromones. But all to no avail. For much of the summer, speckled wood spend most of their time just sitting around on leaves. But when the blackberries begin to get ripe, they provide an irresistible lure. Overripe fruit begins to ooze a sweet juice. For the speckled woods, it's now party time. I wanted to film the Grayling Butterfly, so I made tracks to Rosenellan Downs Nature Reserve. This is part of the mid-Cornwall moors. At first sight, the habitat seems mainly to be dominated by grass, but beneath this lie large numbers of pink-flowered ling plants. These are kept small by repeated illegally set fires. The grass recovers rapidly, the ling takes longer. The Grayling butterflies need bare ground for basking. On this reserve, the bare ground is provided by the fire breaks. When settled on the ground, the graylings are very well camouflaged, as they also are when at rest on low vegetation. Even when feeding on pink ling flowers, the underside is so cryptic that they're really difficult to spot until they move. It's only when there's some kind of disturbance, as by this honeybee, that you ever get a brief glimpse of the grayling's upper side. I'd rarely seen graylings feeding on flowers before, but on this particular day, there were dozens doing it. I'd never seen a grayling laying eggs either, but today I got lucky. I followed this ovipositing female for over an hour. There's the egg. The main food plant for the grayling caterpillar is rather a fine-leaved grass called red fescue. Watch how she delicately fixes her egg to a very slender stem. She's quite fussy about where she places each of her eggs. Here she seems about to perform and then changes her mind and moves elsewhere. After about 30 minutes of constant work, she decided she needed a break. She obviously needed to replenish her energy reserves, which she did by visiting some nearby ling flowers. Just watch how her proboscis coils and uncoils like a watch spring. After filling up for about 10 minutes, back she went to her egg laying. It was while filming this that I heard a sudden clattering of wings from a tiny nearby stream. I knew exactly what that sound meant, so I headed straight for the source of the sound. And there she was, a magnificent golden-ringed dragonfly, busily laying her eggs. Among British dragonflies, the golden-ringed female is unique. Her long, straight ovipositor projects straight from the tip of her body. By bobbing up and down, she repeatedly drives this straight into the silt at the bottom of the stream. This prevents the eggs from being washed away by the current. These poor, acidic moorland streams don't provide much food for the average dragonfly larva. It might take as much as 5 years for the egg to become an adult. It's amazing how the large hairy larva, or nymph, of this dragonfly can thrive in such a tiny stream. In places, this one wasn't much wider than my foot is long. Each given length of stream will be owned by a male who patrols up and down constantly. He's looking for exactly what we're seeing here, a female busy laying her eggs. Here he comes. Now, let's slow it down and see what happened. In the first instance, what the male does is simply land on the female's back, facing the same way. and this is how they initially fly off together. Then at some point, while in flight, the male needs to curve his abdomen forward and grab the female behind the head with his anal claspers. This pair flew round and round rapidly in tandem like this for a while before finally settling on a nearby tree. It was at this point, just before I arrived, that they assumed the mating wheel position. In most large dragonflies, including this one, the actual process of mating can take quite a long time. I watched these for over an hour before I finally gave up. A small boggy area beside the stream was the favourite haunt for the keeled skimmer dragonfly. This male is watching out for females flying overhead. Unlike the males, these are brown, as can be seen in its mating pair. This time it's a quick process, lasting just a few minutes. When they break up, the male leaves his mate and perches close by for a minute or so. Then the female flies off to the nearest suitable egg-laying site. As she bobs up and down, she merely washes the eggs off into the water. The male hovers nearby, defending her against an attempted takeover by a rival male. No problem here, there aren't many males. But here at Breeney Common, there's a surfeit of them. In fact, there's so many of them, and they're so frustrated, that they'll spend a lot of their time trying to grab females of the wrong species, such as this broad-bodied chaser. Apart from the fact that she happens also to be brown, she doesn't bear much resemblance to a keeled skimmer female. For a start, she's much larger and fatter. And yet when she starts dipping into the water to lay her eggs, she rapidly attracts the attention of an over-keen keeled skimmer male. She doesn't get much peace. The interruptions just keep on happening over and over again. Unlike at Rosenannan, the males here really do need to keep a close watch on their egg-laying females. Here, the chances of losing his mate to a hijacker are very high. And there, it's just happened. So now let's watch that again in slow motion. The intruder grabs the female so quickly that her guardian is helpless to do anything about it. But that's probably how he got her in the first place. When there's a particularly low tide, I'll take the opportunity to visit the shore and film one specific type of creature. At this point, I'm just watching the thongweed gently swaying to and fro as the tide recedes. I'm waiting for the water to drop low enough to expose this particular seaweed, the velvet horn. This is the favourite food for a small but beautiful sap-sucking sea slug called Alicia viridis. You can usually find 2 or 3 of these on each velvet horn plant. Meanwhile, up on Bodmin Moor, the hawthorn trees have radically changed their appearance. The permanent swathes of string of sausages lichens are now accompanied by masses of bright red berries. As I stood here filming, my nostrils were filled with the fragrant scent of chamomile. This plant covers extensive tracts of the heavily grazed grassland typical of the moor. Even when not in flower, this is one of the few plants you can detect easily by smell rather than sight. As you stroll along, your feet continuously crush the leaves and release the pungent aroma. Apart from Bodmin Moor, there aren't many places in Britain where you can see carpets of white like this. Over the last few years, chamomile has suffered a catastrophic decline over most of its British range. That decline has not happened in Cornwall, which is now probably its main stronghold in Britain. As well as here on Bodmin Moor, it's also still common on the mid-Cornwall moors and on the Lizard Peninsula. In damp hollows and along stream sides, the Devil's Bit scabious is just starting to come into flower. That's not a bumblebee, despite appearances. It's actually a hoverfly called Eristalis intricarius. And the insect next to it on the flower isn't a hive bee, it's another hoverfly called the dronefly, in the same genus. On this particular day, my main object, in fact, was to film a rare plant growing beside the Delank River. It's really fussy, and it only grows on a tiny area on the far side of the stream, and a little bit in the stream itself. So on go the Wellingtons. It's only in a few places in Cornwall that this plant, coral necklace, is definitely native in Britain. The first Cornish record dates to as long ago as 1662. Over the succeeding centuries, its fortunes seem to have declined greatly. It's now a very scarce plant within the county. It seems to be incapable of spreading outside certain definite areas. This coral necklace was what I originally came here to film. Yet, as often happens in wildlife photography, it led me onto something that was both completely unexpected and totally new to me. Just one step away from the coral necklace were these floating leaves of the bog pondweed. Running around on them was one of several species of leaf beetle that specialise on living on water plants. At first I didn't take much interest in them. I'd seen several species before and hadn't seen much happening. But on this bright sunny morning, quite a bit of activity was taking place. Let's take a closer look at the beetle. Just look at those fat femora. They'd be thighs in us. I'd often wondered why they were so swollen. What was their function? I was about to find out. And we're all about to discover just why the beetle on the right has lost part of one of his hind legs. It turns out that these chunky thighs are actually weapons. The males use them in close combat wrestling matches, grappling together over access to females. These two mini gladiators get so involved in their contest that it spills over onto the object of their desire, the female. She's just sitting there quietly, ignoring everything that's going on. As the sun rose higher, fights began to break out all over the place. I could now see that each fight began with a headstand. This enabled the hind legs to get to grips with each other. Note how the pond skaters keep on darting in. They're alerted by the beetle's movements, causing ripples in the water. As soon as they realise the beetles are not some soft-bodied insect struggling helplessly in the water, they leave them alone. Even when a male manages to come out the winner in a long fight, he still can't guarantee that the female won't play hard to get. Just watch how these two males get into their grappling position actually on the female's back. Here, the classic headstand fighting posture is particularly easy to see, but the female is so disinterested that she just wanders off. Smaller males are often reluctant to join a fight against a larger rival, no matter how hard he might try to get one started. The reason for beetle fights I could understand, but just why an adult pond skater should be engaging in an apparent fight with a juvenile, I have no idea. On a rock close by the beetles and pond skaters, a male common darter dragonfly had established a territorial post. He's only interested in members of his own species or in small insects that could be possible prey. So when a relatively large, beautiful demoiselle damselfly arrives, he doesn't pay it any attention. The beetles and pond skaters that we looked at earlier were living on a backwater of this stream where there was an almost total lack of current. But further out, the water's flowing fast. This is perfect habitat for the river skater, which is a lot larger than the pond skaters we just looked at. Unlike them, it's constantly obliged to ride the current. In most years, towards the end of August, a series of low tides begins. If the weather's good, and that doesn't happen very often, I'll head for the coast. This is a typical sheltered shore at the Vans on the south coast. Here the cliffs are covered in rock samphire, now in full flower. The rather thick fleshy leaves used to be popular when pickled. This plant is well known for being named in one of Shakespeare's most famous plays, King Lear. The small flowers attract quite a range of insects. As the tide began to drop lower, I headed down to the shore. There were dozens of snakelocks anemones, with their long tentacles swaying lazily to and fro in the receding water. Unlike many anemones, the snakelocks cannot retract its tentacles when left high and dry by the receding water. On this particular shore, most of the anemones were of this pearlescent, beautiful white colour. There was just a single green specimen, which is often more common. The purple tips to the tentacles are due to the presence of a symbiotic alga.